Imagine, for a moment, the most exclusive ballroom in Vienna, where the European elite gather every year for a night that defines destinies. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light upon Carrara marble, while the echo of high heels rings out among columns that have witnessed centuries of history. It is here, in the Belvedere Palace, that a story will be written tonight that will forever change the lives of 3 people. For 8 years, Evelyn was the perfect wife. She trusted Michael, the man who promised her the world, and who now, without her knowledge, was about to publicly introduce his mistress at the year's most important social event. But what Michael didn't know is that Evelyn was no longer the naive woman he met. 3 months of private investigation, silent tears, and inner rebuilding had transformed her into something far more powerful. A woman who had decided not only to survive, but to triumph. Tonight, as the orchestra plays waltzes that have accompanied romances and tragedies for generations, we will witness the exact moment a betrayed woman becomes an unstoppable force. Because when a woman decides never to look back, the universe itself rearranges to make way for her power. Her revenge will not be screamed. It will be elegant, devastating, and absolutely irreversible. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and comment below where you're watching from. Your support helps us share incredible stories like this. Part 1. The First Signs. Vienna awoke with that unique majesty only the Austrian capital can display. Morning sun filtered through the Baroque facades of the Ringstrasse, while the aroma of Viennese coffee mixed with the sound of trams clattering down cobblestone streets. In the elegant Innenstadt district, Evelyn Marceau woke up in her 18th-century apartment with a privileged view of St. Stephen's Cathedral. At 32, Evelyn had built a life that seemed straight out of a European fairy tale. Married to Michael Andrasov, a real estate mogul of Russian descent who had turned Viennese palaces into million-dollar investments, she lived between the discreet luxury of Central European aristocracy and Vienna's most exclusive cultural circles. Their 8-year marriage had been, at least in appearance, the perfect example of a successful cosmopolitan couple. Michael, at 40, and with his imposing presence, had not only won Evelyn's heart, but also the respect of the Viennese elite. His gray eyes reflected the determination of someone who had built an empire from scratch, and his slight Slavic accent added a seductive mystery to every word he spoke. He had arrived in Vienna 15 years ago with a suitcase and ambitious dreams, and now he owned some of the city's most iconic buildings. Evelyn's morning routine unfolded between the pages of Die Presse and the Financial Times as she sipped a melange on her apartment terrace. As the director of international relations for the Belvedere Museum, her day began early with calls to galleries in London, New York, and Tokyo. Her work filled her with purpose. She had organized exhibitions that had brought Austrian art to the most prestigious museums in the world. But this particular morning, something had shifted in the atmosphere of her home. Michael had left before dawn, claiming an urgent meeting with Japanese investors. His farewell kisses had been mechanical, distant, as if his mind were somewhere else entirely. Evelyn had noticed these subtle changes in recent weeks. The phone calls Michael would abruptly end when she entered the room. The nights he came home late with the scent of a perfume that wasn't hers, and that new way of looking at her as if she were an obstacle rather than his life partner. The unease that had been growing in her chest was confirmed that afternoon when she received an unexpected call. It was Margot, her assistant at the museum, her voice trembling, a harbinger of bad news. "Evelyn, I don't know if I should tell you this, but I saw Michael this morning at the Café Central. He was with a woman. It didn't look like a business meeting." Evelyn's heart stopped for a moment. The Café Central, with its marble columns and vaulted ceilings, had witnessed the romances of writers and artists for over a century. It was also the place where Michael had taken her on their first date, where he had proposed to her 5 years later. For him to take another woman there now was not just a betrayal. It was a desecration. "What did she look like?" Evelyn asked, surprised by the calmness of her own voice. "Young, maybe 25. She looked like a model, or an actress. She wore a mink coat and jewelry that looked very expensive. He was treating her with an intimacy that, I'm so sorry, Evelyn." The confirmation hit like a physical blow, but also as a strange liberation. For weeks, she had been fighting against the visceral feeling that something was terribly wrong, and now it finally had a name and a face. Michael's betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was a public declaration of disrespect for everything they had built together. That night, when Michael returned to the apartment around 11, Evelyn was waiting for him in the living room. The city lights reflected in the windows, creating a cinematic atmosphere that seemed appropriate for what was about to happen. "How was your day?" she asked, observing every micro-expression on her husband's face. "Productive. The Japanese are interested in the Prater project." His response was automatic, rehearsed. "And yours?" Revealing. The word hung in the air between them like an accusation. Michael looked up from the newspaper he had been pretending to read. "What do you mean?" "I mean that sometimes things reveal themselves, Michael. Like when someone sees your husband at the Café Central with a woman who is definitely not me." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael didn't deny it. He didn't defend himself. He showed no surprise. He simply looked at her with an expression Evelyn had never seen before. Calculated coldness mixed with something like relief. "I didn't intend for you to find out this way," was all he said. These words confirmed what Evelyn already knew, but hearing them aloud was like receiving a sentence. There was no remorse in his voice, no pain for having hurt her, just the practical annoyance of someone whose plan had been compromised. "How long?" she asked. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of fake kisses, of empty "I love yous" before bed. 6 months during which she had been planning their next vacation together, had turned down job offers in other cities so as not to be separated from him, had defended their marriage to friends who, she now realized, probably already knew the truth. "Do you love her?" The question left her lips before she could stop it. Michael looked at her for a long time before answering. Yes, that answer, brutal in its honesty, was the moment something fundamental broke inside Evelyn. It wasn't just her heart or her trust. It was that version of herself that had believed she could hold a marriage together with willpower and unconditional love. That woman died that night in her Viennese living room, under the golden lights of the city that had witnessed their happiness. But from her ashes, something new began to be born. A version of Evelyn that knew no easy forgiveness or second chances. A woman who had decided in that exact moment that she would never again be a victim of another human being's cruelty. "I understand," she said finally, rising from her chair with a dignity that surprised even herself. "Tomorrow, we'll talk about the practical arrangements." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Evelyn was already planning, not just her divorce, but her rebirth. Michael had chosen another woman, but she had chosen something much more powerful. She had chosen to choose herself, forever and with no looking back. The city of Vienna, with its history of empires falling and being reborn, would bear witness to the transformation of a betrayed woman into a force of nature. And the first act of this transformation would take place in exactly 3 weeks, at the annual Belvedere Palace Gala, where Michael planned to publicly introduce his new conquest. What he didn't know is that Evelyn would also be there, and that her presence would change the course of that night and their lives forever. Part 2. The Humiliation And the plan, the days that followed that brutal confession, became an emotional labyrinth that Evelyn had to navigate while maintaining a facade of normalcy to the world. Michael had decided to stay in the apartment until the divorce details were sorted out, a situation that turned their home into a silent battleground where every conversation was an exercise in forced diplomacy. The morning after the revelation, Evelyn woke up with a surprising mental clarity. While Michael slept in the guest room, a decision he had made himself without consulting her, she dressed and went early to the Café Jahuelka, a bohemian haven in the heart of Vienna, where poets and artists had found solace for generations. She needed to be in a place where she could think without every object reminding her of her failed marriage. The cafe, with its walls covered in photographs of famous writers and its atmosphere of smoke and creativity, offered her the anonymity she needed. As she drank her melange and watched passers-by hurry down Dorotheergasse, Evelyn began to process the magnitude of what she had lost. It wasn't just Michael. It was the version of herself that had believed in unconditional love, in marital loyalty, in the possibility of building a life based on mutual trust. Her phone vibrated constantly with work messages, but she was unable to concentrate on the exhibitions she had to coordinate. Her assistant Margot called 3 times before she finally answered. "Evelyn, are you okay? You have a meeting with the Japanese curators in an hour. Cancel it. In fact, kill everything on my schedule this week." "Are you sick?" "Yes," she replied. And it was true in more ways than Margot could imagine. "I'm very sick." The first few days were a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. There were moments when rage consumed her completely, when she walked through the rooms of her apartment, imagining all the confrontations she could have had with Michael, all the cruel words she could have screamed at him. Other moments she felt empty, as if all her vital energy had been drained, and she would sit for hours looking out the window at the city's Baroque domes without really seeing anything. But it was on the 3rd day that the real humiliation began. She was at the Naschmarkt, Vienna's most famous market, buying flowers to fill the apartment with something that didn't remind her of Michael, when she heard familiar laughter behind her. She turned and saw Beatrice and Helena, 2 wives of Michael's business partners, talking in low, but not low enough, voices. "I always knew it wouldn't last," Beatrice was saying. "He's too vital to be tied down to someone so unadventurous. The new one is gorgeous, don't you think? And she has that youth that Evelyn has already lost. Men like Michael can't be blamed for looking." Helena stopped abruptly when she noticed Evelyn had heard them. The encounter that followed was excruciatingly civilized. Fake smiles, feigned condolences, and that look of pity that Evelyn would recognize for the rest of her life. It was the look reserved for women who have been replaced, as if it were an inherent flaw in them that had caused their husband's infidelity. "Darling, if you need anything at all," Beatrice murmured, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you," Evelyn replied, maintaining her composure even as she felt herself crumbling inside. But the worst was yet to come. That same afternoon, as she walked down the Graben toward the museum, she stopped in front of the Kirchert jewelry store, the same one where Michael had bought her engagement ring. In the window display was a collection of diamond necklaces she immediately recognized. It was the Empress line, inspired by the jewels of Empress Sisi. And there, admiring one of the most spectacular necklaces, was Michael. He wasn't alone. The woman next to him was exactly as Margot had described. Young, beautiful, with that artificial beauty only money can buy, and completely oblivious to the fact that she was being watched by her lover's wife. Evelyn stood motionless, hidden behind a column, as she watched Michael interact with this stranger with a tenderness he hadn't shown her in months. The scene that unfolded before her eyes was more painful than any direct confrontation. Michael caressed the young woman's arm as the jeweler showed them different pieces. The intimacy between them was obvious, not just in their physical gestures, but in the way they looked at each other, as if they shared secrets no one else could understand. It was the same way Michael had looked at her during the first years of their marriage. But what truly devastated her was the moment she saw Michael take one of the necklaces, a piece valued at over €200, and place it around the young woman's neck. She looked at herself in the mirror with an expression of genuine ecstasy, and Michael smiled with a satisfaction that Evelyn recognized but hadn't seen directed at her in years. It was more than a romantic betrayal. It was a public declaration that this new woman deserved the kind of grand gestures and extravagant gifts he had stopped giving Evelyn. It was as if he was rewriting the story of his capacity to love, suggesting that what he had shared with his wife had been a diminished version of what he now felt for this stranger. Evelyn remained hidden until they left, and only then did she realize she had been holding her breath. Her hands were shaking when she finally walked away from the jewelry store, and she had to sit on one of the benches in the square to regain her composure. That night, when Michael returned to the apartment with an expression of satisfaction he made no attempt to hide, Evelyn was waiting for him, with a question she had been formulating for hours. "Are you taking her to the Belvedere Gala?" Michael stopped dead in his tracks. The annual Belvedere Palace Gala was the most important social event of the Viennese season, where the cultural, business, and political elite gathered for a celebration that had been a tradition for decades. It was also the event where Evelyn had shined year after year as the perfect wife of the real estate mogul, known for her elegance, her intelligence, and her ability to navigate conversations in 5 different languages. "Evelyn," Michael began. He looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes, she saw something that was worse than guilt. She saw relief. Relief at finally being able to live his new relationship without having to hide. "Yes, I'm taking her." Those words were the moment Evelyn hit rock bottom. It wasn't just that Michael had found someone else. It was that he planned to publicly replace her at the same event, where she had been his companion for 8 consecutive years. It was a humiliation specifically designed to erase her from Viennese society, to send the message that she had been officially replaced in every aspect of the life they had shared. "You know what the most interesting thing about all this is?" Evelyn said, rising from her chair with a calm that concealed the inner storm. "It's not that you've found someone else. It's that you've decided to publicly humiliate me, as if the 8 years we were together were something you had to be ashamed of. It's not personal, Evelyn. Everything is personal, Michael. That night, while Michael slept in his new room, Evelyn stayed awake until dawn, looking out the window at the lights of a city that suddenly felt alien and hostile. She had spent 8 years building an identity as Michael Andrasov's wife, and now that identity was being publicly demolished. But as the first rays of dawn illuminated the domes of Vienna, something crystallized in Evelyn's mind. She had been viewing this situation as something that was happening to her, as a victim of Michael's decisions. But what if she decided to become the architect of her own story? The humiliation Michael had planned for the gala could be the perfect setting for something completely different. Not for her destruction, but for her public rebirth. For the first time in days, Evelyn smiled. It wasn't a smile of happiness, but something much more powerful. It was the smile of a woman who had decided to fight. The gala was just 2 weeks away, and Evelyn Marceau had work to do. If you've ever felt betrayed in the cruelest way possible, comment below how you found the strength to carry on. Your story might help someone who is struggling right now. Part 3. The counterattack. Evelyn's transformation didn't begin with a dramatic moment of revelation, but with a cold, calculated decision she made while having breakfast alone in her apartment, a week after confirming that Michael would take his mistress to the gala. She had spent days navigating between self-pity and anger. But that morning, as she read in D-Press the list of confirmed attendees for the event, something fundamentally changed her perspective. Not only were the most important names in Austrian society going to be present, but the guest list also included Princess Beatrix of the Netherlands, several European ambassadors, and, most importantly, Marcus Zimmermann, the most influential art critic in Central Europe, who had flown in especially from Munich to cover the event. This meant the ball would not just be a social gathering. It would be a documented, photographed, and commented on event in the continent's most prestigious media. Michael had chosen the perfect stage for her public humiliation, but he had also given her the perfect platform for her rebirth. The first call she made was to Victor Steinberg, Vienna's most discreet private investigator, known in certain circles for his ability to get information without leaving a trace. Victor had worked for European politicians, businessmen, and aristocrats, and his reputation was based on two principles: guaranteed results and absolute silence. "I need you to investigate someone," she told him during their meeting at a discreet cafe near the Danube. "Her name is... I actually don't know her name. I just know she's my husband's mistress." Victor, a man in his 50s with the nondescript appearance that was perfect for his profession, listened without judgment as she described everything she knew about the young woman. "What kind of information do you need exactly?" "Everything. Her name, her background, how she met Michael, if she has family, if she has debts, if she has secrets. And I want to know exactly what kind of person she is." "I can ask why you need this information." Evelyn looked him directly in the eyes. "To make sure that when I'm done with this, she wishes she had never been born." Victor nodded slowly. In his 20-year career, he had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who had decided to go from victim to hunter. "I'll have a full report for you in 5 days." While she waited for the investigation results, Evelyn began her own physical and emotional transformation. Her first stop was at Vienna's most exclusive salon, where Anastasia, the personal stylist for European actresses and socialites, received her with the professional discretion her clientele required. "I want a complete change," she told Anastasia as she sat in front of the mirror. "But I don't want to look like I'm trying to be younger. I want to look more powerful." The process took 6 hours. Her hair, which she had worn long for years because Michael preferred it that way, was cut into a sophisticated style that framed her face and gave her an executive air of authority. The facial treatment removed any trace of the sleepless nights she had endured, and the professional makeup highlighted her eyes in a way that made them seem more penetrating, more intelligent. When she looked in the mirror at the end of the day, Evelyn saw a different woman. Not younger, but more formidable. It was the difference between looking like someone's important wife and looking like someone important in her own right. Her next stop was at the atelier of Isabella Toretti, the Italian designer who had dressed European first ladies and royalty. Evelyn had booked a private appointment to choose her dress for the ball, but had very specific requirements. "I want something that makes the entire room stop when I walk in," she explained to Isabella. "But I don't want to look desperate for attention. I want to look like attention is my natural right." Isabella, with her expert eye for understanding not only fashion, but the psychology behind it, began showing her options that were more than dresses. They were declarations of elegant war. After 2 hours, they had found the perfect piece, a dress that combined European sophistication with a cut that accentuated Evelyn's best features without revealing too much but suggesting everything. "When you walk in wearing this," Isabella told her as she made the final adjustments, "it won't just be your ex-husband who realizes what he lost. It will be the entire room." But Evelyn's real transformation was happening internally. In the afternoons, while Michael avoided the apartment, presumably to be with his mistress, she dedicated herself to redesigning not only her appearance, but her entire life strategy. Victor's call came exactly 5 days later, as promised. Her name is Natasha Komarova. She's 24, born in Moscow. She arrived in Vienna 2 years ago on a student visa that expired 6 months ago. She's officially here illegally. She worked as a model for a second-tier agency until 4 months ago, when she met your husband at an art auction at the Albertina Gallery. Her reported income is inconsistent with her current standard of living. She lives in an apartment in Leopoldstadt that costs over 3,000 euros a month, has a wardrobe valued at over 50,000 euros, and drives a BM that is registered in the name of a shell company. A shell company? One of Michael's subsidiary companies. Technically, he doesn't own the car, but he's paying all the associated expenses. Family? A single mother in Moscow. She worked as a nurse before her early retirement due to a disability. Natasha sends her money monthly, but not enough to explain the sudden improvement in her mother's living conditions. There's evidence that someone else is financing Mrs. Komarova's private medical care. She has a younger brother, Pavel, who is studying medicine in Moscow on a scholarship that mysteriously appeared in his financial records 3 months ago. The scholarship is being funded by an educational foundation that, after some digging, turns out to be another subsidiary company of your husband. Evelyn closed her eyes and felt the puzzle pieces fall into place in her mind. Michael wasn't just having an affair. He was financing the entire life of this young woman and her family. The money he was using to turn Natasha into his Russian princess was money that came from the companies he and Evelyn had built together during 8 years of marriage. Victor, I need one more favor. Tell me. I want you to document every transaction, every payment, every gift, and I want all that documentation ready for the day of the gala. I can ask what you have planned. Evelyn smiled, and it was a smile that would have sent shivers down Michael's spine if he had been there to see it. I'm going to remind my husband why divorcing me is going to be the most expensive decision of his life. This is the ultimate betrayal. Have you ever had to confront someone who publicly betrayed you? Let us know in the comments how you found the courage to face them. Part 4. The final rehearsal. The night before the gala, while Michael was getting ready in the bathroom for his big public debut with Natasha, Evelyn received an unexpected call. It was Hans Müller, Austria's most feared divorce lawyer, known for representing billionaire wives in divorces that had destroyed men's fortunes. Mrs. Androsov, I've been reviewing your financial situation as you requested. I have some interesting news. Your husband made a fundamental mistake. Many of the properties he acquired during your marriage are technically in both of your names, due to Austrian marital property laws. This means you have a legal right to half of everything, including the buildings he considers his personal empire. And if we can prove that he has been using marital assets to finance an extramarital affair, we could argue alienation of affection and mismanagement of marital property. In Austria, this could result in a much more favorable division of assets for you. Evelyn felt as if she had been playing chess while Michael was playing checkers. He had been so focused on his new relationship that he had forgotten to legally protect himself from the consequences of his betrayal. Hans, I want you to start the divorce proceedings tomorrow night after the gala, and I want it to be the kind of process that every financial newspaper in Europe writes about. Are you sure you want to do this publicly? Michael decided to make our separation public by bringing his mistress to the most important social event of the year. I'm just going to make sure that the consequences of that decision are equally public. That night, while Michael slept in the guest room, probably dreaming of his social triumph the next day, Evelyn stayed awake until dawn. Not from anxiety, but from anticipation. For weeks, she had been a victim of others' decisions. Tomorrow, she would become the architect of her own justice. As the first light of dawn illuminated the spires of St. Stephen's Cathedral, Evelyn had already made the most important decision of her life. She was not just going to survive this betrayal. She was going to turn it into the catalyst for her own rebirth. Michael had chosen the battlefield, but she was going to dictate the rules of engagement. The Belvedere Palace Gala was just 12 hours away, and Evelyn Marceau was ready for war. Part 5. The Grand Entrance. The day of the gala dawned with that crystal-clear clarity that only Vienna can offer in spring. From her window, Evelyn could see the city's Baroque domes shining under a sun that seemed to be conspiring with her plans. It was as if the universe itself had decided that this would be a perfect day for justice. Michael had left early, claiming he had preparations to make for the night. Evelyn knew exactly what kind of preparations. He was probably helping Natasha get ready for her debut in Viennese society. The irony was delicious. While he focused on making his mistress look presentable, he had completely underestimated the transformation his wife had been orchestrating. At 10 in the morning, the apartment became the operations center for Evelyn's final metamorphosis. Anastasia arrived first with a full team of makeup artists and stylists. It wasn't just a personal grooming session. It was the preparation of a warrior for the most important battle of her life. "Today, we don't just want you to look beautiful," Anastasia told her as she began the facial treatment. "We want you to look invincible." While the team worked on her physical transformation, Evelyn made strategic calls. The first was to Marcus Zimmermann, the art critic who had flown in from Munich. "Evelyn, my dear, I'm thrilled to see you tonight. I understand you've been working on some fascinating projects at the Belvedere. Marcus, tonight is going to be much more interesting than you can imagine. I suggest you keep your camera ready." Should I be intrigued or worried? Both. The second call was from Victor, confirming that all the documentation she had requested was ready and would be delivered discreetly during the event. "Are you sure you want to do this way?" he asked her. "I decided a long time ago that I don't want to look back." The third call was the most important. It was from Isabella Toretti, confirming that the dress had arrived and was being transported to the apartment, with the care reserved for invaluable works of art. At 2 in the afternoon, when Anastasia's team had finished their work, Evelyn looked in the mirror and saw a completely transformed woman. It wasn't just the flawless makeup or the hairstyle that made her look like a European queen. It was something in her eyes, a steely confidence that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. "Perfect," Anastasia murmured, stepping back to admire her work. "You're going to be the most elegant woman in that room." "No," Evelyn corrected her. "I'm going to be the most dangerous." The following hours were an exercise in calculated calm. Evelyn had a light lunch, meditated for 30 minutes, and mentally rehearsed every detail of what would happen that night. She wasn't nervous. She was focused with the precision of a surgeon before a critical operation. At 5 in the afternoon, Isabella personally arrived with the dress. The process of getting dressed was ceremonial, as if she were putting on armor designed specifically for this battle. When she was finally ready, at 6:30, Evelyn took one last look in the full-length mirror of her room. The woman who looked back at her was powerful, elegant, and completely ruthless. It was the version of herself that had been waiting to emerge during 8 years of marriage. Her phone rang. It was Michael. "Evelyn, I'm coming to the apartment in half an hour to change. I hope there won't be complications." "Don't worry, Michael. I'm leaving now. The apartment is all yours." "You're leaving? Where to?" "You didn't think I would stay home while you publicly present your new life?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Evelyn, I think it would be better if..." "If what? If I stayed hidden like a humiliated wife?" "My dear Michael, that version of me died 3 weeks ago. The one you're going to meet tonight is completely different." She hung up before he could respond and turned off her phone. She wanted no distractions during what was to come. The Belvedere Palace stood against the evening sky like a Baroque jewel, its gardens illuminated, creating a magical atmosphere that had been the setting for aristocratic celebrations for centuries. Carriages and luxury cars formed an elegant procession toward the main entrance, where photographers from Europe's most important magazines were positioned to capture the most notable guests. Evelyn arrived in a classic Mercedes-Benz she had rented especially for the occasion, driven by a uniformed chauffeur who had received very specific instructions on the timing of her arrival. It had to be exactly at 8:15, 15 minutes after the official start time, to ensure that most of the guests were already present. When the car stopped in front of the palace's main staircase, Evelyn took a deep breath. This was the moment, not only of her triumphant entrance, but of the beginning of her new life. The chauffeur opened the door for her, and when Evelyn emerged from the vehicle, it was as if time stood still. The photographers who had been capturing the arrivals all night immediately focused their cameras on her. The flashes began to fire like frantic fireflies. "Evelyn, over here! A photo!" "Mrs. Androsov, can you tell us anything about the separation rumors?" She smiled with the grace of someone who had been born for this kind of attention, but she didn't stop to answer questions. Her entrance had been calculated not for the external media, but for the audience waiting for her inside. The golden doors of the Belvedere Palace opened before her, revealing the most spectacular ballroom in central Austria. The vaulted ceilings were decorated with original 18th century frescoes. The crystal chandeliers cast golden light on the polished marble, and the European elite moved in elegant patterns among columns that had witnessed centuries of history. But when Evelyn entered the hall, something magical happened. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses were suspended in the air, and heads turned as if drawn by a magnetic force. It wasn't just her appearance, although she certainly looked like a vengeful goddess dressed in European elegance. It was her presence, the way she walked, as if she owned not only the hall, but everything in it. The confidence she radiated was so palpable that it altered the energy of the entire room. "My God," someone murmured near the entrance. "It's Evelyn Androsov. I thought they were getting divorced. Look at her. Does she look like she's getting divorced or getting crowned?" Evelyn walked through the hall like Cleopatra entering Rome, greeting acquaintances with a grace that perfectly concealed her intentions. Every conversation was a masterpiece of social diplomacy, but her eyes constantly scanned the room, looking for her main targets. She found them near the main bar. Michael was impeccable in his tuxedo, looking like the successful mogul he had been for years. But by his side, Natasha Komarova was exactly what Evelyn had expected. Young, beautiful in that artificial way that money can buy, and completely out of place at an event of this sophistication. The young woman wore an expensive but ill-chosen dress for the occasion, dazzling jewelry, but without the cultural knowledge to wear it with true elegance. It was obvious that Michael had dressed her like an expensive doll, but he had forgotten that true sophistication cannot be bought. It is cultivated over decades. Evelyn didn't approach immediately. Instead, she began to work the room strategically, gradually getting closer to her target while building an audience for what was to come. Her first stop was with Princess Beatrix of the Netherlands, who received her with genuine affection. "Evelyn, my dear, you're radiant. The rumors about your marital problems have obviously been exaggerated." "Oh, the rumors are completely true, Your Highness. But as you can see, some problems are actually opportunities in disguise." Her second conversation was with Marcus Zimmermann, who immediately noticed that something extraordinary was happening. "Evelyn, there's something different about you tonight. You're luminous. Marcus, tonight is going to be memorable. I suggest you document everything you see. Should I be expecting something specific? Just keep your eyes open." By 9 o'clock, Evelyn had created a magnetic field around her. The most important guests at the event were gravitating toward her, drawn by that indefinable energy of someone who knew something they didn't. The anticipation was palpable. It was then that she decided it was time for the final act. With a glass of champagne in hand, and a smile that would have made emperors tremble, Evelyn began to walk directly toward Michael and Natasha. Every step was calculated, every movement designed to maximize the impact of what was about to happen. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the betrayed wife approached the unfaithful husband and his conquest. It was like a scene from an Italian opera, with all the dramatic tension that only real life can provide. When she was finally in front of them, Evelyn smiled with a sweetness that was more terrifying than any expression of anger. "Michael, darling," she said in a voice that was honey over steel, "you didn't tell me that your companion was so young." Part 6. The unmasking. The silence in the Belvedere Palace ballroom was so thick that you could hear the echo of every breath among the marble columns. The guests had formed an unconscious circle around Michael, Natasha, and Evelyn, like spectators in a coliseum, awaiting the decisive moment of an epic battle. Michael, who had spent weeks imagining this moment as his social triumph, suddenly looked like what he really was, a middle-aged man who had traded decades of respect for a few months of novelty. His face had lost the arrogant confidence he had shown for the past few weeks, and for the first time since the beginning of his affair, he seemed to realize the magnitude of what he had put at risk. Natasha, who until this moment had been enjoying her debut in Viennese high society, began to understand that something was terribly wrong. Her youth and inexperience made her unable to read the subtleties of what was happening, but the tension was so palpable that even she could feel it. "Michael, who is this lady?" she asked in English with a Russian accent, her voice betraying her growing nervousness. "Oh, my dear," Evelyn replied, before Michael could speak, addressing the young woman directly with a maternal smile that was absolutely terrifying. "I'm Evelyn Marceau, Michael's wife. Though I suppose he hasn't told you much about me, has he?" Natasha's face visibly paled. Any fantasy she had about being the only woman in Michael's life crumbled in that moment. For months, he had led her to believe that his marriage was just a convenient arrangement, something that existed on paper, but not in reality. Being confronted with the real wife, in all her elegance and power, made her realize she had been naive. He told me you were separated," she stammered. "Separated?" Evelyn laughed, and the sound echoed throughout the hall like shattering glass. "My dear girl, until 3 weeks ago, Michael and I were sharing the same bed. Did he tell you that, too?" Murmurs began to spread through the audience like ripples in a pond. The guests weren't just witnessing a marital confrontation. They were seeing the public unmasking of a man who had built his reputation on honesty and integrity in business. Michael tried to regain control of the situation. "Evelyn, I don't think this is the place for..." "For what, Michael?" "For the truth." Her voice rose slightly, just enough for every person within a 20-meter radius to hear every word. "You're right. This is definitely not the place for the truth. This is the place for elegant lies, respectable facades, and carefully constructed reputations. Unfortunately for you, I'm no longer interested in maintaining your facade." At that moment, as if it had been choreographed, Victor discreetly appeared beside Evelyn and handed her a leather folder. The timing was perfect. The audience was completely captivated, and there was no way Michael could escape without looking guilty. "Do you know what's in this folder, Michael?" Evelyn asked, caressing the leather as if it were a precious relic. "These are very interesting documents. Bank statements, for example, jewelry store receipts, apartment records, payments to universities in Moscow." Michael's face transformed completely. Arrogant confidence was replaced by something close to panic. He knew exactly what those documents contained, and he knew that their public revelation would not only destroy his marriage, but potentially his business empire. "Did you know," Evelyn continued, now addressing both Natasha and the surrounding audience, that my dear husband has been financing not only his young friend's luxurious lifestyle, but also her mother's medical treatment in Moscow and her brother's university education? All using money from the businesses we built together during 8 years of marriage. The murmurs turned into a constant buzz of shock and fascination. This was not just infidelity. It was a financial scandal that involved the misuse of marital funds. Natasha, who until that moment had been living in a golden bubble of willful ignorance, finally began to understand the true nature of her relationship with Michael. She wasn't a muse for a divorced man. She was the beneficiary of a scheme of marital fraud. "Michael, is this true?" she asked, her voice cracking. Michael didn't respond. He couldn't. Anything he said at that moment would only make his situation worse, but his silence was a confession in itself. "Oh, but that's not all," Evelyn continued, opening the folder with the ceremony of someone about to reveal the final act of a symphony. "There are also some very interesting photographs of apartments that technically belong to me being used for, shall we say, romantic encounters, of cars bought with money from our joint accounts being driven by people who are not us. If you've ever had to confront someone who publicly betrayed you, like this video, and tell us in the comments how you found the courage to face them." Michael's humiliation was now complete and public. Every important person in Viennese society was witnessing his unmasking as a man who had not only betrayed his wife, but had used marital resources to finance that betrayal. His reputation as an honest businessman was crumbling in real time, but Evelyn wasn't finished. "And now," she said, closing the folder and looking directly at Natasha, "my dear girl, I want you to understand something very important. The man who has been showering you with gifts and promises is not a generous bachelor. He is an unfaithful husband who has been stealing from his own marriage to impress you. Every necklace you wear, every elegant dinner you've shared, every promise he's made to you has been paid for with money that legally belongs to me." Natasha, who had started the night feeling like Cinderella at the ball, now saw herself for what she really was. A naive young woman who had been manipulated by a married man who had lied to her about everything. The jewels she wore, which had been a symbol of her glamorous new life, now felt like chains of humiliation. "I didn't know," she murmured, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "He told me you were divorced, that you were just what?" Evelyn asked with a false gentleness that was more cruel than any scream. "Just an obstacle? Just a legal nuisance?" "My dear, I am not just anything. I am the woman who built this empire with him, who knows every one of his secrets, who has access to every one of his accounts, and who has just decided that it's time to collect what's mine." At that moment, like the perfectly timed final act of an opera, Hans Müller appeared discreetly next to Evelyn. His presence did not go unnoticed by Michael, who immediately recognized Austria's most feared divorce lawyer. "Mr. Andrasov," Hans said, with the cold formality of someone who had destroyed men's fortunes as a hobby. "These are the divorce papers. Legal proceedings will officially begin tomorrow morning." The entire hall was now completely silent. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the public dismantling of a man who had believed he could rewrite the rules without consequences. Michael took the papers with trembling hands, and for the first time since the beginning of his affair, he seemed to fully understand the magnitude of what he had lost. It wasn't just Evelyn. It was his reputation, potentially half his fortune, and definitely his position in Viennese society. "Evelyn," he tried one last time, "we can talk about this in private. It doesn't have to be like this." "In private?" Her laugh was like champagne poured over steel. "Michael, you decided to make this public when you chose this event to introduce your replacement. I am simply making sure the full story is told." She then turned to Natasha, who was silently crying as the reality of her situation settled in. "And you, my dear, you have a decision to make. You can stay with a man who has lied to you about everything from day one, who has used stolen money to buy you, and who has just shown that he has no problem publicly humiliating women when it suits him. Or you can retain some of your dignity and walk away before this gets any worse." Natasha looked at Michael with an expression of growing disgust. For months, she had believed she was special, that she had found a successful man who valued her. Now she realized she had been just a transaction, a purchase made with money that wasn't his. "Michael," she said in a voice that trembled with anger and humiliation. Was it all a lie? Michael couldn't answer. His silence was a sufficient response. Without another word, Natasha took off the diamond necklace he had bought her that afternoon and let it fall to her feet. The sound of the diamonds hitting the marble echoed throughout the hall like a final sentence. "I don't want anything you bought with stolen money," she said, and she walked away, leaving Michael completely alone in the center of the circle of spectators. Evelyn watched the young woman's retreat with quiet satisfaction. It hadn't been personal against Natasha. She, too, had been a victim of Michael's lies. But now the truth had been revealed, and every person involved would have to live with the consequences of their decisions. "And now?" Evelyn said, addressing Michael for the last time. "I think my work here is done. My lawyers will contact you tomorrow morning to discuss the terms of our divorce. I suggest you get very competent legal representation. You're going to need it." She turned to walk away, but stopped and added one last observation that would become the most repeated quote of the Viennese social season. "You know, Michael, for 8 years I believed my greatest strength was my ability to forgive. Tonight, I discovered that my true power lies in my capacity not to forgive, and it's an absolutely liberating feeling." With those words, Evelyn Marceau walked out of the Belvedere Palace ballroom, leaving behind not only a ruined husband and a stunned audience, but also the version of herself that had tolerated being treated as disposable. The camera flashes followed her to her car, but this time, they weren't capturing the humiliated wife of a real estate mogul. They were documenting the birth of a woman who had decided that her own dignity was more valuable than any marriage, any social comfort, or any expectation of what a good wife should do. As the Mercedes drove away from the palace, Evelyn took one last look at the golden lights of the event that had marked the end of her old life and the beginning of something completely new. She didn't know exactly what her future would look like, but she knew with absolute certainty that it would be a future where no one would ever treat her as a secondary option again. Part 7. A powerful new life. In the months that followed, Michael and Evelyn's divorce would become one of the most talked about cases in Austrian legal history. He lost not only half his fortune, but also several important contracts when his business partners decided that his lack of personal integrity made them reluctant to do business with him. Natasha returned to Moscow 2 weeks after the ball, but not before giving an interview to a European magazine in which she revealed additional details about how Michael had manipulated their relationship. Her testimony would further strengthen Evelyn's legal case, but Evelyn's true victory was not in the courts or in the newspaper headlines. It was in the mirror of her new life, where each morning she saw a woman who had learned that self-respect is non-negotiable, that personal dignity is worth more than any relationship, and that sometimes the most powerful decision a woman can make is the decision not to look back. The story of Evelyn Marceau is not just the chronicle of an elegant revenge served in a Viennese ballroom. It is the testimony of a universal truth that transcends cultures, eras, and borders. The most powerful moment in a woman's life is not when she forgives the unforgivable, but when she decides that she no longer needs to. For centuries, Women have been conditioned to believe that their greatest virtue lies in their capacity for sacrifice, in their ability to hold dysfunctional families together, in their willingness to forgive repeated betrayals in the name of love. But true female strength is not in the ability to endure pain infinitely. It is in the wisdom of knowing when to say, enough. Evelyn didn't destroy Michael for revenge. She confronted him because she had come to a fundamental understanding of her own worth. That a woman who respects herself does not negotiate with her dignity, does not accept emotional crumbs, and definitely does not allow anyone to rewrite her story as if she were a secondary character in her own life. The elegance of her response was not in her designer dress or the palatial setting where her justice unfolded. It was in her refusal to become a victim of another's decisions. When Michael chose to betray her, she chose to liberate herself. When he decided to publicly humiliate her, she decided to publicly reclaim her power. There is a fundamental difference between revenge and justice. Revenge seeks to cause pain. Justice seeks to restore balance. Evelyn did not act out of hate, but out of a deep love for herself that had been dormant for years of marriage, where she had prioritized comfort over personal integrity. Her story reminds us that self-respect is not an emotional luxury we can afford when circumstances are favorable. It is a fundamental necessity that must be fiercely protected, especially when others try to convince us we don't deserve it. For every woman who has doubted her worth after a betrayal, who has considered forgiving and forgetting because it seemed like the easier path, who has believed that maintaining a toxic relationship was preferable to facing the uncertainty of the unknown, Evelyn's transformation offers a powerful alternative. The certainty that a woman who chooses herself never makes the wrong decision. The true happy ending did not come when Evelyn humiliated Michael at the gala. It came the first morning she woke up alone in her Viennese apartment and realized that she preferred dignified solitude to the company that required her to betray her own soul. In a world that constantly tells women to be more understanding, more tolerant, and more willing to work on the relationship, Evelyn's story is a revolutionary reminder that sometimes the most loving decision a woman can make is to love herself enough to walk away from those who don't value her. Not all battles have to be fought in Viennese ballrooms with designer dresses. Some are fought in suburban apartments, in corporate offices, in family living rooms, but they all share the same fundamental core. The moment a woman decides that her dignity is not for sale, that her happiness does not depend on the approval of others, and that her future will be written by herself. Evelyn's liberation did not come from destroying Michael. It came from building herself into a woman who would never again allow anyone to treat her as a secondary option. It came from understanding that genuine forgiveness is only possible when it is offered from a position of strength, not desperation. Her transformation from betrayed wife to empowered woman was not magical or instantaneous. It was the result of conscious decisions, day after day, to choose her own well-being over the comfort of others. It was the understanding that self-love is not selfishness. It is the foundation from which all true love must be built. For every woman who reads this story, who sees her own wounds reflected in Evelyn's silent tears, who recognizes her own doubts in her transformation process, the message is clear and powerful. You too have the right to a life where you are the undisputed protagonist of your own story. You don't need a Viennese palace to reclaim your power. You don't need a private investigator to discover your own worth. You don't need a designer dress to carry your dignity with elegance. You only need the courage to look in the mirror and decide that the woman you see there deserves something better than the emotional crumbs others are willing to offer her. Evelyn's true victory was not that Michael lost half his fortune in the divorce. It was that she gained something infinitely more valuable: the absolute certainty that a woman who respects herself is never truly alone, because she carries with her the most powerful company in the world, her own unbreakable self-esteem. In the cobbled streets of Vienna, under the golden lights of the cafes where Mozart once composed symphonies, Evelyn Marceau's story joins the long tradition of women who have chosen to write their own endings. Women who have understood that the greatest act of love is not forgiving the unforgivable, but loving themselves enough not to have to. And in that fierce and unshakable self-love, in that decision never to look back, in that choice of dignity over comfort, lies the seed of all personal revolutions that have changed the world, one woman at a time. Because when a woman decides she is worth more than the lies she has been told about her own value, when she chooses the uncertainty of the unknown over the certainty of being belittled, when she trades the hope that others will change for the certainty of her own growth, she not only transforms her own life, but inspires all the women around her to ask themselves, and what if I too decided that I deserve something better? What's your biggest takeaway from Evelyn's journey? Share your thoughts below, and if you loved this story, remember to subscribe to our channel for more.